Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. Happy to be with you once again. It is a post-game podcast edition coming to you on Saturday evening from Beaver Stadium. We are high atop Beaver Stadium. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my background. And the lights are on here. It was an afternoon game. It lasted about 3.5 hours all the way to 7 o'clock. And the end result, Penn State winning 52-6 over Villanova in their non-conference finale for the 2025 season. Things are about to get a lot tougher at 3-0. They'll go into a bye week, and they'll come out of that back here in Beaver Stadium, final Saturday of September, with the whiteout matchup against a top 5 opponent in Oregon as Big Ten play gets launched. We have a lot to talk about as Penn State transitions from non-conference to Big Ten competition. We'll get to some of the bye week plan later on this episode, but we have a lot to run through here, and we're doing it with Tyler Calvaruso. He's jumping in the saddle for Daniel Gallen, who, as we referenced leading up to this matchup, he's out for a wedding this weekend. Hopefully he had a great time, and a good excuse to get Tyler Calvaruso his first game experience in Beaver Stadium. He's been around for a bunch of prospect camps here in the stadium before. But Tyler, good to have you in the press box, and now we're going to do some lifting together here, working toward the finish line of our evening with our post-game podcast.
Yeah, I mean, if Daniel wants to have a wedding in 2 weekends from now, that'd be pretty cool. I wouldn't mind coming back for the whiteout. But no, in all seriousness, it was great to get out here today, and we've definitely got a lot to get into. So it was a good afternoon of Penn State football, but still plenty to dissect from the afternoon.
Yeah, 25 consecutive wins for Penn State now over non-conference opponents in the regular season. This was viewed as a generally easy pathway towards 3-0 for the Nittany Lions. It largely was over the course of this, the non-conference action. We saw them outscore opponents by a lot to a little. And yet, Tyler, when you are considered one of the top teams in the country and you're talking about yourself as a national championship contender leading up to kickoff, there's going to be scrutiny. We'll get to some of that in a bit because the offense, the inconsistencies there, they do pop up on your radar in a significant way as Penn State tries to sharpen things up before that Oregon matchup. But I thought we would begin here with the defensive performance that James Franklin described as a significant step forward for that unit. It sounded like he felt like they were playing a lot faster in Game 3 under new coordinator Jim Knowles than they were in Game 2, and certainly in Game 1. There was a notable personnel change that we'll get into a bit, but Tyler, when we look at the body of work in non-conference action, you can only play who's across from you. And this Penn State defense gave up 17 total points along the way. They only gave up 2 touchdowns. One came with 25 seconds remaining in a blowout win over Nevada. One came as time expired on a remarkable one-handed catch in the back of the end zone today for Villanova that actually took some money out of certain people's hands and placed it in other people's hands if you're into the betting scene. But ultimately, again, this defense largely lived up to expectations, and I think we got enough of a look here at progression from a communication standpoint, from a schematic standpoint, where you feel pretty good about whatever Oregon's going to bring your way offensively. You might be able to match up with it and give yourself a real chance to go toe-to-toe with one of the more high-octane attacks in the country in recent seasons.
Yeah, take what you will from a sample size of 2 Group of 5 opponents and an FCS opponent, but this just looks like a defense that has the talent and the scheme is good enough to where this unit can play with any unit in the country and it could keep Penn State, I think, in any game against any opponent. You know, when you have a new defense and all this new schematic stuff, all the new terminology being installed, you look at a non-conference slate like this that is easy on paper, but you look and you see, are there any blown coverages throughout the slate? Are there any gaping errors and things that stand out? I haven't seen any of it. I think that this Penn State defense is extremely locked in right now. I think all these guys are very in tune with their responsibilities. They know what their task is in Jim Knowles' system, and they have been executing it at a high level. And today was another example of that. That defense really just completely overwhelmed Villanova's offense. And again, the talent disparity is what it is. We all know Penn State is vastly more talented than an FCS Villanova program. That's just the reality of it. But again, it comes down to responsibilities in doing your job. And that's what the Penn State defense has done throughout non-conference play. And that rang true throughout Saturday. Really, in all 3 phases, the defensive line gave Villanova's O-line a lot of problems. The linebackers were flying around. There were not many, if any, windows in the passing game available for Villanova. That's how good Penn State's secondary was. So this unit checked all the boxes in week 1. Here we are going back now to the bye week, almost a month later. and they're still checking all the boxes. So if you're a Penn State fan, you got to be really encouraged with the progress of this group throughout the non-conference slate.
Less than 200 yards allowed from Villanova's offense today, less than 3 yards allowed per play, 2 takeaways along the way. They've got 6 of those through 3 games, turned one of those takeaways into immediate touchdown, which we'll get to in a moment. But I think when you look at this defense overall, Tyler, they're using a lot of players. We've said for a long time, you're going to need to look beyond the starting lineup because it's going to be, essentially maybe a 20-man plan week to week as guys that you can rely on seeing consistently. And King Mack showed his face last week as someone that was definitely on the rise defensively. He was over 30 snaps in week 2 against Florida International. A week before that, he had a big kickoff return. He has shown flashes in his return from Alabama where he spent his sophomore year. But today we were a little surprised that Jumbotron lit up with his name, his face as a starting safety during pregame work. And all of a sudden now he was out there sharing the field with Zakee Wheatley. It had been Antoine Belgrave's shoulder job for the last couple of weeks. That was a bit of a surprise preseason surge by the redshirt freshman. And James Franklin talked about it. He said a lot of guys in this position who come back from a school like Alabama, he didn't come back to not be a starter. And so he said instead of kind of getting down on himself and being in the dumps about this going into the season, he responded emphatically, smile on his face, attacking special teams, attacking the practice field. And James Franklin seemed to think that there was a need for this defense to be able to operate quicker. Part of that was addressed, I think, with some of the communication work they did this week in practice. I spoke with their Mike linebacker, Amari Campbell, about that headset communication. And they had issues the last couple of weeks with just some of the Beaver Stadium noise and working through those calls from Jim Knowles in the box. That was really fixed in some significant ways this week on the practice field with some of the volume and intensity they brought, kind of challenging them with those calls on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And by the time they got to Saturday, it seemed like that was a lot more comfortable. But the other part of this equation is James Franklin came out of this game and he said he wants to watch the film to just confirm some things. But he felt like this defense was operating quicker with King Mack out there, helping relay information, helping set the pace. And he's told us a few times with Jim Knowles' defense, linebackers and safeties have a ton on their plate. We know Zakee Wheatley has locked in one starting job. Dejon Lane continues to get a bunch of work. Antoine Belgrave's shoulder isn't going anywhere, although he's out of the starting lineup right now. And we'll see if King Mack can hold on to this. But this is career start number 1 for him. This is a former top 100 overall recruit when he came to Penn State in 2023. And Tyler, we're fresh off you publishing a story on King Mack's rise to the starting lineup. What do you make of it? And ultimately, what do you think it could maybe do to Penn State's ceiling in the defensive secondary?
Well, James Franklin said he felt that they needed to be faster on defense, and they wanted to play faster on defense, which I think is a fitting sentiment because think back to King Mack's recruitment. What was his prospect profile? What was his calling card as a recruit that made him a blue chip prospect? His elite speed. Now, it doesn't come down to just raw physical speed because you have to be able to process what you're seeing. That has to do with speed as well. You got to be able to process things quickly, especially in a scheme like the one Penn State is running now that is more complex than some other schemes. You got to be on the ball in that regard. And King Mack has come along so nicely throughout, really, since fall camp ended. He could have been discouraged because he fought tooth and nail to earn a starting job in this secondary. He fell a little bit short. He got pegged for a complimentary role instead. He didn't put his head down. He didn't sulk. He didn't say, oh, man, I came back here. I didn't get my starting job. What am I doing? No, none of that. Kept working and really just stayed the course and did everything that he had to do to hear his name called inside of Beaver Stadium as a starter for the first time. I think Mack's skill set, I remember talking about him frequently as a recruit. We labeled him as this Swiss Army knife kind of guy who can impact your defense positively in a multitude of ways. I think we saw a little bit of that on Saturday. And to come back to the speed, I mean, he's flying downhill from his safety position to come make plays against the run. You can move him around in your defense. He could play that nickel if you need him, but he could work in the box, even though he's a little bit smaller of a guy. He can cover over the top. He could work as a center fielder if you want to go one high and leave him there on his own. All of these things that King Mack does well, that's why Penn State wanted to bring him back. He didn't burn any bridges in departing for Alabama. That's not how that went down. And his return was met internally with jubilation. And he expressed his gratitude for being welcomed back in that manner earlier in the week. And I think it's a move that's going to prove to be fruitful for all parties involved when it's all said and done. And look, Oregon's going to be a test for King Mack. It's going to be a test for this entire Penn State defense. James Franklin said, there's still a feeling that there are steps that Mack needs to take in his progression. The hope is that he takes those steps sooner rather than later, because I think if he continues on this track, he could be a vastly productive safety for Penn State throughout this year and for many games to come. So when we look back at King Mack's Penn State career and his tenure and the impact he was kind of able to make on the back end of that secondary for the Nittany Lions, Saturday's game against Villanova could be the starting point of it all.
4 tackles today. Last week, he may have had the hardest hit that we've seen in Beaver Stadium so far this season. Maybe Luke Reynolds getting clobbered a little bit this week could top it, but it's up there. And then King Mack also had a pass breakup on a 4th down play last week when FIU was trying to generate some points later in the contest. So he's had his moments, not to mention the 73-yard kickoff return in game 1. And I'll just tell you this. We know that the defensive backfield is a point of pride for Penn State. It's not surprising. It's a perennial kind of thing. But I'm actually thinking that this defensive backfield is better than I thought it was going to be because the depth is in a different spot. Part of that is that safety, I feel pretty confident because we've seen a bunch of those 4 safeties. It's not like we've only seen 2 or 3 of them. Dejan Lane has played extended snaps. We've seen a ton of King Mack to this point, probably more than we anticipated when he wasn't named the starter. Starting to get a feel on who Antoine Belgrave-Shorter is after he only played about 50 snaps last week. And then, of course, Akee Wheatley is a guy that we think is going to compete for a first-team All-Big Ten kind of nod. Wheatley, Mack, and then cornerback Davian Collins are 3 guys who have flashed to me in terms of just cutting down angles. When you think you've got a running back or receiver or a tight end in the open field, and you think, this could be a 30-yard gain or he could go all the way. Those 3 defensive backs, particularly Wheatley and Davian Collins, because they've probably played more. I think they've made a lot of open field saves that just kind of reflect on, like you said, 3 phases of this defense. You feel pretty good when the first 2 don't handle their business. That third wave will get it done. Not to mention Darius Dixon, but also Jameer Joseph in that freshman class. And people are raving about what he did today. Tyler, you and I both called him one of the top 5 freshman impact players for this team going into preseason camp. They haven't said he's going to burn his red shirt, but he was over 20 snaps in game 1 at cornerback. Spent last week on the sidelines, resurfaced this week with some opportunities playing later in the game, and took a interception back 49 yards. And it was a hell of a play. I mean, it was a highlight reel kind of return. James Franklin was highly complimentary. He said he turned into an offensive player with the ball in his hands. And I do wonder if we get to the point as the season progresses where Penn State's ultimately going to burn 2 red shirts at cornerback with Darius Dixon and Jameer Joseph. Again, adding to the versatility, adding to the depth of this secondary.
No doubt. And I mean, that return for the touchdown on the interception is one of the best ones I've seen in a while. I mean, Jameer Joseph, he was dynamic with the ball in his hands throughout his high school career when he was allowed to play offense, and you saw it on Saturday. And he's definitely a guy who could burn through that red shirt. We've established that Darius Dixon is that kind of a player, and Jameer Joseph is that kind of a player as well. And that doesn't mean that he's been playing the bulk of the snaps in the secondary either. He's the kind of kid who can make an impact on special teams for you, kind of like King Mack did as a true freshman. To go back to King Mack for a second, kind of the way that he did, Jameer Joseph can make a similar level of impact for you. And look, as much quality depth as you can get, the better. That's the case at every position. And we know Terry Smith will run his young guys out there if they've proven they can handle it. So far, so good for Jameer Joseph on that front, because I think every time that he has taken the field as a Penn State Nittany Lion, he's gotten better. He's improved. And again, it's like, again, with Mack, like, you got to pass some tests here, right? What's Jameer Joseph's role going to look like against Oregon? You're probably going to rely more on your veterans in that setting. But as time goes on, and Joseph continues to earn the trust of Terry Smith and earn the trust of Jim Knowles and earn the trust of the entire defensive coaching staff and head coach James Franklin, he can definitely carve out some sort of role and contribute and make an impact on some sort of level. It's not, I really do not think we're going to be talking about Darius Dixon as the lone true freshman cornerback contributor on this year's team when we reflect on this season. I think Jameer Joseph is going to have something to say, and he's going to be part of that conversation.
the freshman story has really been Chaz Coleman. He did flash again today. He had a tackle for loss. He had a QB hurry along the way. But Jameer Joseph got the spotlight in game 3. It is a freshman class we'll continue to keep tabs on and see how they can impact things in the Big Ten when we're going to see rotations start to narrow down and some of these backups spend a lot more on the sideline. How many of these freshmen will kind of survive that cutback and still be integral pieces of the personnel plan? We'll learn more. I think as we look, by the way, one more name, Kenny Woosley. He's a dude. He is going to remain in this defensive backfield.
No
I
doubt.
know when people saw Zion Tracy come back in game 2, they said, okay, well, maybe that's the end of Kenny Woosley's storyline for now, because he started in game 1 at the nickel position with Tracy sideline. He played on the perimeter last week too. He's playing in multiple spots. High IQ player, and I just think he's just about as polished as a cornerback. As a redshirt freshman, didn't play much last year, as I've seen. And he's not the most physically, in terms of like the kind of the frame, he's not the most physically gifted cornerback they've had here. But I think he's someone who's very cerebral and has proven, whether it was last year's scheme, this year's scheme, he has been a great quick learner to it. So I want to give Kenny Woosley a little spotlight too as I'm talking about defensive back depth. Linebacker, I think we saw a lot from that tandem today, Antonio Rojas and Amari Campbell. And I know it's really a trio conversation at linebacker. You throw in Dom DeLuca. Those are the 3 at the top of the linebacker pecking order. That's going to remain the case all the way through. But Campbell is a guy who last year with North Carolina had 6.5 sacks. We talked about it. He was the best player on a below average defense, quite frankly. Now he's surrounded by a bunch of alpha players, and he's fitting in pretty well, man. 3 tackles for loss today. His first sack as a Nittany Lion. I talked about how they have tightened things up from the communication standpoint. He deserves credit for that. We talked after this game how he was really working through this high volume that they were sending his way in practice this week, and he thinks he came out the other side of it just more prepared to deal with things. And we know what awaits here in a couple weeks behind me on the field in a wet-eyed atmosphere. They have to have that down. So Amari Campbell, to me, team high 7 tackles, and his ability to work off of Tony Rojas. When we talked about Campbell coming to campus, we talked about his background with Tony Rojas, 2 former Virginia high school standouts, guys who knew each other well. Rojas was talking to the staff. He was talking to Campbell as this whole thing was coming together after spring ball, and he comes on board, and here they are together. Rojas today, a couple tackles for loss. He almost had a 3rd tackle for loss. He nailed the running back in the backfield. He ended up getting away from him before some defenders brought him down near the line of scrimmage. But, Rojas had 2 sacks, and he seems to be hitting his stride now, healthy after being limited last season. So, Daniel, I'm so used to saying that. Tyler, I think we have a lot to learn overall about this linebacker group. Anthony Specca was involved. I thought Alex Tash flashed a little bit today as a freshman. We have a lot to learn about depth. But at the top of this thing, feeling really good about what they've got cooking right now. And I think Amari Campbell and Tony Rojas are showing the physicality, accountability, leadership traits, and also this edge to them and kind of the body language that's going to help set the tone for this Penn State defense. And that's what you're looking for from the linebacker group, especially when you're often only going to have 2 linebackers on the field in this defensive scheme.
Yeah, they're loving playing together. I think what you saw today is pretty much what they envisioned when they started discussing teaming up here at Penn State. Look, Campbell looks really, really comfortable in this defense. It's not where he was when he first arrived on campus. I got the chance to catch up with him during the offseason. He was like, I had some things to learn. I had some things to figure out. Getting comfortable in this Jim Knowles defense, I think he's reached that point. And you mentioned it with Tony Rojas. I think it's probably the biggest thing with him. He's healthy again. I think he's back to being Tony Rojas, the high-level athlete that he was coming into Penn State, kind of the freakish kind of kid. You're seeing him run around, 2 tackles for loss today, almost had a 3rd that just escaped him in the first half. Just overall highly impactful game from that tandem. And then the young depth flashes as well. Alex Tash, he's going to be a good player. Yeah, him and Anthony Specca, guys like that, they're going to be good players for Penn State. With Tash, you hope that he stays healthy because the shoulder injuries that he dealt with in high school, it's always scary when you're talking about the shoulder for the linebackers, just knowing the physical toll of playing the position. And we're going to continue to learn more about the depth moving forward. And, these guys, it's going to fall on Campbell. It's going to fall on Rojas. It's going to fall on Dom DeLuca as the year goes on. Those are going to be the linebackers that Penn State relies on the heaviest. But waiting in the wings, I think you got some pretty talented players. But when it comes to Campbell and Rojas, 2 weekends from now, when it's Oregon in town inside Beaver Stadium, I think those 2 are going to be flying around making more than their fair share of plays.
Yeah, Tash, also Cortez Harris, a freshman defensive end, making their college debuts. And there may have been some others along the way that we missed. We'll pick that back up early next week in the bye week. But people are saying, okay, enough about backup linebackers. What about this quarterback? What about this offense? Penn State has national championship goals, hasn't exactly looked like a national championship attack through this portion of the schedule. And so as we get into it, the conversation is probably going to begin with Drew Aller. I think it came out sharp, right, Tyler? 3 of 3, 33 yards on that first drive. It was really the Nick Singleton focus in that first possession and 8 carries along the way. And we'll talk about how that ended up working out between Singleton and Katron Allen. It was kind of an interesting look at their usage today. But Drew Aller, when they got into some 2-minute situations too, like at the end of the half, he's looked sharp. I think that's really kind of been a case much of this non-conference play is when they're in hurry up and the tempo intensifies a little bit, seems to be a little bit more in rhythm. But as you wrote tonight, Tyler, rhythm is kind of evading the grasp of this offense right now. And when you think about all the experienced pieces that come together at the offensive line, at quarterback, where Drew Aller tonight made his 33rd career start, in your backfield where you've got 2 other seniors, you've got a lot of guys, not to mention Andy Kotelnicki here in year 2. I think that's the concerning thing here for fans. It's the concerning thing when you cover this team as closely as we do. And I know James Franklin just saying it's an area where they wish they were further ahead right now because it's not matching expectations. It's not looking smooth. You're putting up some points. You're putting up some yards here week by week, but you're not finishing drives. And it just doesn't look like a cohesive group that has been together for years at this point.
It doesn't. And, don't fall victim to looking at the numbers and the box score because the numbers are gaudy, but they don't really paint the picture of where this offense is at right now. And I think Penn State is well aware that it has a lot of work to do to get itself right for Oregon. I mean, Drew Aller, he's missing open receivers, not seeing them, not going through his progressions in a manner that you'd expect of a veteran quarterback with a bunch of big game experience. It's just not the kind of performance. Well, again, ignore the numbers and just watch the tape. Not what you'd expect of a guy like Aller, who's as talented as him against Group of Fives and FCSs. He expects
Tyler, here's the word we used week 1. Daniel and I used it like 10 times. In command.
Yeah.
And we really thought that's what you would get from Drew Aller in this 3-game non-conference play. In command for at least 3 quarters, and then maybe you take a seat and watch Ethan Grunkemeyer do work. That has not been the case beyond that game 1 outside of a few possessions. It has almost kind of felt like Drew Aller and the offense are working through some training wheels as though he was a first-time quarterback for them or as though they were getting used to a new offensive philosophy under a new play caller. And that's been on home turf as a 40-point favorite. And I think when people start to project this forward, what does it look like when you go up against a top 5 team like Oregon, or much less a competent Big Ten opponent like a Nebraska or an Indiana down the line, because you're going to need more than this.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, he looked like he was in command and in control in that first drive of the game today. That drive was flawless, and that kind of encapsulates the whole situation right now. There are glimpses of this offense looking like it should look and looking like itself. I mean, when they run 2-minute, they're very tough to slow down. Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, when they're operating at their best, still pose one of the strongest 2-headed backfield threats in college football. You've seen good things from the trio of wide receiver transfers. Luke Reynolds is really coming into his own at tight end. You see glimpses of what this unit should be and can be. And that's why there's confidence internally, and I think there should be confidence externally as well, that this group is going to be able to figure it out. But the frustration that a lot of Penn State fans have right now with this offense, it's warranted because there are just mistakes taking place and errors that are being made that should not be happening because this group is not lacking talent. It's quite the opposite. It's not a talent issue. They're just lacking rhythm. They're lacking consistency, and you got to figure it out during the bye week because what's been taking place and what's been transpiring on the field offensively, it's not going to fly against Oregon because here's the reality of the situation. Not only is Oregon one of the most talented teams in college football, Dan Lanning's one of the better defensive minds in college football. He's going to throw likely the kitchen sink at Penn State to come out of Beaver Stadium with a win, with a signature win, in a potential top 5 matchup. So if you're Penn State, you got to take this bye week and you've got to watch the film and you've got a lot to figure out and work on and fine tune. And you've got 4 practices to do that. It starts Sunday. They're going to be right back at it. James Franklin said it.
Here, under the lights of Beaver Stadium Sunday. They are not messing around. They're getting back at it because they know. I mean, Franklin mentioned it twice, and usually he doesn't look too far down the road, but he understands. He said they have a challenge and an opportunity ahead of them. He knows what's at stake from a public perception standpoint. He also knows what that performance will mean, I think, internally within his locker room. For whatever they go out and produce on September 27th, they're going to carry that with them. And we've heard so much, affirmative conversation from them about, we don't have to prove anything to anybody else. We got to prove it to ourselves. I believe them, but they still have a lot to prove to themselves after 180 minutes of football. And it gets really real in a couple weeks.
Yep. And you've got 4 practices to figure that out before Oregon week gets here. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. You've got 4 practices, and obviously you have your game week of preparation, but practice looks a little bit different during game week. We all know that. This is the time to figure things out. And I think that we're going to see – I truly do believe that we are going to see a Penn State offense that is tweaked for the better against Oregon. I think there should be confidence in Andy Kotelnicki to go in the lab and figure out what needs to be fixed. And I think there should just be confidence in the talent that Penn State has on its offense to figure this out. But if there's trepidation surrounding that right now, I completely understand it.
Yeah. Aller went 85% completion rate week 1, 58% week 2, 55% week 3, 16 of 29 for 209 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. I'm reminded of Sean Clifford's performance against Villanova a few years back when they struggled to run the ball. He ended up throwing for 400-plus yards and 4 touchdowns, I think, that day. This time around, they did run the ball, 240-plus rushing yards for Penn State. They were over 6 yards per carry on average. I think we're starting to maybe alleviate some concerns a bit here with the offensive line. Not that anyone thought that they were a detriment to the team, but I think people were like, oh my gosh, is this more of an average offensive line than a great offensive line through the first couple of weeks? I think communication from my naked eye, without reviewing this game and without kind of getting feedback from Penn State people, was that there was a little bit more cohesion up front. I wonder how much of that is the fact that they had those 5 starters out there on the field together just about most of the way through. I mean, when they got big in some situations, they brought in Cooper Cousins, they brought in TJ Shanahan, but they really stuck with those 5. And I wonder if that's a part of it. I know they feel good about rotating pieces in, but I think we saw some growth there. But we saw something really interesting at running back, and it was something I followed up with James Franklin in the postgame podcast, Tyler. In the postgame press conference, Tyler. We heard we heard from James back on Monday during the weekly press conference that, Singleton is someone that they wanted to let it rip. Stop overthinking it, get him on track, let him be the guy they know he is, use those natural talents, be the breakaway threat that he's always become. Look back at game 1. He had a couple 1-yard touchdown runs. His longest run, though, on the day was 6 yards. Some improvement last week, but we saw him miss some significant holes that he could have really put on the Jets and had a big moment or two, and it would have totally changed kind of the narrative around him. He wasn't able to accomplish that last week. And I think we come out of this game 20 touches, 80 yards, what did he get out with? 84 yards on 20 carries, another couple touchdowns. He's racking them up. He could finish first all time and touchdowns scored here. But you didn't see Nick Singleton, I guess, take charge and look like that game-changing type playmaker who was so key during the playoff run last year. And a guy who we have seen at different times of his career really swing momentum at any moment. It was still kind of rough sledding for him, it felt like today. And James Franklin told me, I asked afterwards, and he told all of us that there was no plan to get Nick Singleton involved early, or I guess to make sure that Nick Singleton was getting a lot of touches along the way and feeding him versus feeding Kaytron Allen. Because I brought it up to James Franklin. You get to the fourth quarter in this game, Kaytron Allen has 6 touches. Nick Singleton has 20 touches. And, Kaytron Allen's coming off a game where he had 144 rushing yards, a career high. He seems to be playing at a very high level right now. And so I asked James Franklin, is this correlated to what you said last Monday about wanting Singleton to get on the track and get him rolling? He had 8 carries on that first possession. That's as many as he had in game 1 total. Franklin said, no, that's not the case. Andy Kotelnicki isn't sitting there thinking of it in that way when he calls plays. It just happens to be how the offense flows, how possessions flow. I understand that, but we also didn't see Kaytron Allen get a touch until the fourth possession of this game. We also saw Kaytron Allen get one touch in the third quarter. And again, just coming off of some of the conversations we had about Nick Singleton and their desire to, maybe get him right in a mental way, they gave him a lot of opportunities today. I hope that they all feel, better about him coming out of this game. Just from the naked eye, it's hard to tell if there was a significant step taken against this Villanova defense by Nick Singleton. And, of course, by the end of the day, with his 10 carries, Kaytron Allen actually finished with more rushing yards. 10 carries, 86 yards, and a touchdown compared to 20 carries, 84 yards, and 2 touchdowns for Nick Singleton. This has been 1A, 1B for 3.5 years now. Tyler, I've covered these guys 44 games. I don't recall there being a disparity in touches like this deep into the game. And all due respect to James Franklin commentary, I'm still not convinced it wasn't about trying to get Singleton right tonight. And that played a factor in their offensive game plan.
Yeah, I think anytime you give a guy 8 carries on a series, let alone the first drive of the game, I think you're making a pretty concerted effort to, jumpstart him or get him going in some capacity. Whether that's at the forefront of your focus or in your subconscious, I think that's something that was definitely part of the way things played out today. And look, Kaytron Allen didn't get a lot of touches. He made the most of his touches. I don't think it's unreasonable to sit here and make the argument that, look, Nick Singleton is just the guy who needed more touches in this game because this was very much a get-right opportunity for him. And I'm with you. I'm not quite sure where he stands in that regard coming out of this. I think he's still getting comfortable in this version of Penn State's offense. I think he's still working on some things and some coaching points and talking points with Stan Drayton that maybe he wasn't focused on as much when Jaywan Sider was a running backs coach. I think that's
overthinking is the word we heard. So yeah, maybe that's still in play.
It definitely could be. You hope it's not going into Oregon, just the magnitude of that game. You want Nick Singleton operating at peak efficiency, and that means thinking less and just getting after it more. Because when Nick Singleton gets loose, he's a tough guy to bring down. He could rip off some big runs. He could be that home run threat for you. And then Kaytron Allen, we know what Kaytron Allen is the bruiser of the group. So I said it earlier, man, when those two are right, it's one of the best backfield duos in college football. It could very well be the best backfield duo in college football when they are right. I think there's a lot of good football ahead of this duo this season. I'm still not quite certain where exactly things are at with Singleton. 20, 84, and 2, that's an encouraging line. But again, you watch the game, you watch the tape, you still wonder how comfortable Nick Singleton is right now.
Yeah, Nick Singleton's a guy who can go get 80 on one touch. We've seen him do that essentially on an SEC stadium field as a freshman. And here's the thing with Nick Singleton. There have been streaky elements to his career. The sophomore year was a bit of a challenge for him. It was a challenge for a lot of the offense. The coordinator got fired. But, it has ebbed and flowed a bit for him. And what I do know is he could show up in that first quarter against Oregon and on his first touch of the game go 70 yards for a touchdown in the bright lights of a whiteout. And everyone will kind of start to forget what took place through these first 3 non-conference matchups. But if it persists, and this is something they really got to figure out during the bye week, gauge where Nick Singleton is with this running backs coach, with this scheme, with what's expected of him, the overthinking angle of all this, because to me, it's hard to say this because they have been partners in crime for so long, attached at the hip. But when you remove Kaytron Allen from the field right now, it feels like you're removing maybe your best player on the field offensively. He's at that level, and he was at that level last December and January when he needed him. This is not a slight to Nick Singleton. And I know we've all been very careful to bunch these two next to each other, but as a runner, strictly as a runner right now, in terms of vision, in terms of hitting that hole, moving the chains, Kaytron Allen's just operating at a different gear. You hope Nick Singleton can get there with him. And you're right. When they're both there, there's no better duo in America. But right now, it's kind of strange that we're through 3 games and we're scratching our heads a little bit about the confidence level in Nick Singleton and Drew Aller, 2 guys who have started more than 30 games next to each other in Penn State uniforms. But again, when you're chasing perfection, when you're chasing the number 1 team in the country, average to even above average results can't get it done. And the court of public opinion is going to be a bit tougher for you. And we're part of that court, unfortunately, sometimes with the podcast. But Tyler, I want to get into a couple more angles for the offense before we wrap up this post-game edition of our show. And I think it's worth getting into those receivers. I think you come out of this non-conference play and maybe the numbers haven't been explosive. I feel good about this group. I think you have clearly in a better place at the perimeter. I have questions right now about their quarterback's ability to consistently get the ball to them where they need to be and identifying some of those reads right now. And that's not where you want to be, but we'll see what it looks like later this month. But I feel like whether it's Hudson with his contested catch ability, we saw him kind of be the man in game one. Devontae Ross with his slippery nature exhibited very well on punt returns this week. He got another deep ball target this week. Could have maybe been in play for a pass interference, a shot at the end zone. And then Trevor Pena, he's become Mr. Utility. I mean, not only is he able to return punts for you, he had a 10-yard return in the first game, but he had 4 carries today. It's something he did at Syracuse, but 2 of those carries went for more than 10 yards. He also had a very significant role in the receiving game, a 23-yard touchdown reception, and 4 catches for 60 yards on the day with 7 targets. And again, I think we have more to learn about the quarterback, which I can't believe we're saying about Drew Aller right now, but I understand where we're at. I feel like we've learned a lot about the receivers. Pena needs to work on the drops. He talked about that today. He feels like he hasn't been as sure-handed as he needs to be, but it's good stuff from the transfer receivers, and we've seen those from all 3 of them through 3 games.
Yeah, I like where that trio's at right now. They've all flashed in different capacities and at different points as well. It hasn't been all 3 of these guys did one thing in one game and that was it. No, they've been consistently contributing and flashing what they could do. Pena's performance was very, I think, encouraging today. I think it was the first time where you saw the real Trevor Pena. You saw how Penn State could play to his strengths as a route runner and an overall weapon in this offense. We know he's a smooth, crisp route runner. I mean, he was getting open and creating separation against that Villanova secondary with relative ease. But first time where they really, ran him on some jet sweeps, made use of his speed, got him to the edge. It's something he's been doing since he was a high school kid in Jersey. That's been part of his game for a long time. Penn State played to it on Saturday, and it worked out well. And they did it well within the flow of the offense, right? It wasn't force-fed in any capacity. Pena was getting to the edge. He was making Villanova defenders miss. And in the passing game, he was getting himself open. So I'm with you. I like where this trio's at. I think as long as Drew Aller's getting these guys the ball consistently, it's going to be a highly impactful trio. I mean, they're just the agility, making guys miss in the open field. You're seeing things that, and it's not a knock on the guys who came before them, but just things that the wide receiver room was lacking last year. And I think it's going to be pretty pivotal for the success of the Penn State offense moving forward here in Big Ten play. But today was definitely another encouraging showing from that group. And I just think that they are what this version of Penn State needs in 2025.
And I got to be honest, we keep bringing him up on these post-game podcasts. Harrison Walls today, over 90 receiving yards, a touchdown catch for Ole Miss against Arkansas in an SEC matchup. Folks, he has stacked 3 straight games of 90-plus receiving yards. He had 2 games in his Penn State career where he went over 80 receiving yards. He played a lot of ball here, so we're learning a lot of things right now about the receiver position here at Penn State and abroad, and we'll see what happens now moving forward into Big Ten play if Drew Aller can pick things up a little bit, because I think he has the pieces to elevate around him, and if they can work together, there's a chance to really see this pass attack emerge in a way it could not last November and into December and ultimately January, where you need to be at peak performance. But to be honest, with all due respect to them, with all due respect to Khalil Dinkins, who's getting a bunch of starts, Luke Reynolds could prove to be the top pass target for this team already as a sophomore, former 5-star. You and I spent a lot of time on camp fields here in State College watching Luke. He was fantastic to deal with. He was on the podcast a bunch. I caught up with him again after this game. He's still great to speak with, but he is feeling confident, and he is a tone setter. I'm getting a real vibe about this guy. I'd be surprised if he wasn't in the mix to be a team captain next year as a junior. 4 catches for 73 yards. He led the team in receiving yards. Last week, he led the team with 7 catches on the day. 46 yards after catch, though, and I think that's what stood out to me. He makes things happen with the ball in his hands. He's got some wiggle for a 6'4", 250-pound tight end. We can see he clearly has not lost the athleticism that he exhibited as a 5-star recruit, despite adding about 30 to 35 pounds since he got here. And what I like about him is he remains this freakish vertical downfield threat, but he has proven himself as someone who embraces blocking. I talked about this leading up to the matchup. If you watch this game closely today and you watch Luke Reynolds, aside from his pass targets, he gets the job done. He on a 16-yard run for Drew Aller at one point, I think it was a third down play, he's clearing his man out 15 yards down the field. And he is a physical dude. He got rocked. Like I said, it might have been the hardest hit we saw in Beaver Stadium this year. He popped back up. Not only did he hold on to the ball, he got up and he was chirping a little bit. He is a guy who, when this offense is looking for answers and they're looking kind of for an identity or someone who's going to be a rah-rah guy, he's kind of answering that right now. For whatever reason, it hasn't been Drew Aller possession by possession by possession. That's not necessarily been Katron Allen or Nick Singleton's personality, although Katron brings a lot of violence to the field with his rushing style. I feel like Luke Reynolds can be a lot more to this team as an emotional, as a spiritual piece even than I anticipated. And I think that gives a lot of credit to a guy who's, in the third game of his second season at college. He's further ahead, and I think he could be flirting with significant all Big Ten kind of accolades if he continues on this trajectory.
Yeah, he's tough as nails. And the blocking is something we wondered about when he was coming out of high school, simply because it wasn't something.
And so did he. I mean, he was even honest with us. He's like, I'm going to have to learn how to be a blocker, but I'm going to go do it. So
he straight, it's just not something he did. He was a high school quarterback turned tight end. At what point during your
Tyler Warren. Yeah. Tyler Warren. Yeah.
Yeah. When are you going to be blocking? The only time that Luke Reynolds did any sort of blocking work was going to Penn State, camping and working at it with Ty Howe. And he worked pretty diligently at it. And that work has continued since he got to Penn State. Luke Reynolds, I think, has gone from, and we loved him coming out. Obviously, he was a 5-star recruit. We were well aware of his potential as a pass catching tight end. I think Luke Reynolds has really become kind of the complete package at tight end with the blocking, just everything that he brings to the table. It's what you want out of a tight end in this Penn State offense. So he's another one of those young guys. His best ball is ahead of him. He's getting better weekly. And it's not just a thought, it's tangible. You put on the tape, and the production is matching what you're seeing on tape out of Luke Reynolds. I think he has the athleticism to go up against the best of the best in college football, which he is going to see in the Big Ten. It starts with Oregon. They've got some athletic linebackers that will be able to run with him. He'll be able to play against those guys, and he'll be able to produce. So it's a loaded tight end room. We all know that. But Luke Reynolds, when it's all said and done, he might be the best of the bunch. It's just the arrow is pointing definitively up here.
Yeah, and Andrew Rapier got involved again. Catch along the sideline, and he continues to get his feet back underneath him. He's in a good place. So they got 3 tight ends you can win with. We got to give Joey Schlaffer a little bit of love, though, because Ethan Grunkemeyer finds him for a touchdown late in this game. He's been the 4th tight end. That's going to be his role. But he's a redshirt sophomore, a guy who was a top in-state target for Penn State during his recruitment. Hasn't had a chance to make a lot of noise on the offense, but first career catch goes for a touchdown today. So tip of the cap to him. But Luke Reynolds really is going to be the story at that position moving forward. The last thing we want to finish on here, Tyler, is special teams, because the stock of that unit keeps rising. Good for special teams coordinator Justin Lustig. They call him big in team facilities. He is really putting together a nice resume here in year 2 with Penn State. We talked about the return game. Devontae Ross today had 2 returns of 10-plus yards. That gives you 4 of those type of punt returns on the season. Ross has 3. Pena has 1. That's through 3 games. Last year, in 16 total contests, Penn State had 3 punt returns of 10-plus yards. We talked about this on the pregame podcast. It has gone from a position at punt returner that was, hey, don't mess up and please get the ball to Drew, to, hey, make some magic happen and let's see what happens. Let's have some fun. That's what happens when you go out and you not only add transfer receivers with pedigree at their position, but these are guys who were all conference special teams returners, Pena and Ross. And we've seen really Ross take on the mantle. And by the way, King Mack doing what he's done at kickoff returner. Love what special teams is trending in that direction. And then when you make field goals, good things happen. When you miss field goals, even when you're scoring a bunch of touchdowns, you wonder when it's going to bite you in the ass. Right now, as Penn State's kind of been dealing with not finishing drives, they've also got a really good look at a really good kicker Ryan Barker, 9 of 10 from field goals now on the season, 3 more conversions today. He's making it look easy out there. His one miss wasn't even really a miss. It was a blocked field goal, and that was from 50-plus yards last week in the final moments of the first half against FIU. So Barker's a guy who went from a walk-on story last year, took the job, kicks the game winner at USC, does really well the rest of the way, but you still kind of want to hold your breath a little bit with the kicker position. And he comes in year 2, and he has been dynamite. And so, Tyler, I think when you start to elevate one phase, you have to take that into account. Is the offense where we thought it would be through 3 games? No, there's no doubt about that. Is the defense where you thought it would be through 3 games? Probably on point there. And I think it's fair to say the special teams is ahead of that curve, especially now you've got a weapon in Gabe Nwosu. Didn't see a lot of punts lately from him, but they love him, and he can boot it, as we saw. It's a different kind of power at your punt position right now. But I think a lot of it is the ability to produce points from your place kicker position and then potentially from your punt and kick return spots.
Yeah, consistency is key on special teams. That's what you're getting out of Ryan Barker right now. I mean, he's been money. Like you said, the lone miss was a block. Nothing you could have really done about that. So he's been awesome. I think he's been everything that Penn State could possibly ask of him. And that's huge because there are so many programs in college football that deal with issues at the kicker position. Penn State, and they're not one of those programs right now after, having some struggles at the position throughout James Franklin's tenure. Ryan Barker has definitely solidified things with his consistency. The return game is the big thing for me because it felt like in the past and last year, you were kind of playing the return game in a manner where, all right, just don't put the ball on the ground. Don't make a mistake. But now you have a guy like Devontae Ross, who is a really good return man. And you can weaponize the return game now. And King Mack, too, on kickoff. Like, he is a legitimate weapon in the return game. You don't have to play it safe in that area anymore. I'm sure that wasn't the desired approach. You wanted to generate some explosive plays on special teams, but you just didn't have guys like Devontae Ross and King Mack. They operate in a different realm in the return game. And again, that's not a knock on the guys who were returning kicks and punts for Penn State before them. It just isn't, but because Ross and Mack, they're different kind of guys. So the ceiling of this special teams unit, when you combine Barker's consistent manner when it comes to field goals and PATs, the punting game of Gabe Nwosu, we'll obviously see more of him because you're going to punt the ball a little bit more in Big Ten play. And he's got a booming leg. I think he's going to be exactly what the Penn State staff has been selling him as. I think he's going to be really, really impactful when it comes to flipping the field. And then you look at the return game. The ceiling of this unit is probably the highest it's been in a while. That's a credit to Justin Lustig, and that's a credit to the personnel that are comprising the special teams units right now.
It's the highest I've seen. This is my 9th season covering. It's the highest ceiling special teams they've had. And let's remember, last time they beat Ohio State, it took a big time special teams play to get it done. It is a huge part of the game. We don't talk about it until it screws up, and then everyone talks about it. We haven't talked about it enough, probably, and I think it's something that Penn State, if you're a little bit concerned about what the offense isn't where you want it to be, hey, look at special teams. That's far beyond where you were probably hoping it would be through 3 matchups. Tyler, anything else you want to toss on to our airwaves here before we say goodbye? Because it's been a pleasure sharing the press box with you. Hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again. I don't think we can find an extra seat for you because there are no extra seats for the Oregon matchup up here.
Definitely.
But anything else to add to the conversation as a punctuation mark?
I mean, this has been a blast, and you know me, I got to mention recruiting in some capacity before I get out of here. It seemed like it was going to be a dead day. It wound up not being necessarily a dead day because you had Kamon Spell, a 5-star running back commit out of McKeesport. He popped up back on campus, and that's big. I mean, he was slated to go to Notre Dame for its matchup with Texas A&M today. He was going to be back at Penn State last weekend. He got hurt, wasn't able to make the trip. He's feeling a little bit better. Penn State staff wanted to get him back before his upcoming whiteout visit on the 27th. He made the trip, and I think no matter how you slice it, that's an overwhelming positive because I've had Notre Dame circled as if there's a program that's going to flip Kamon Spell, Fighting Irish might have the best shot at doing it just because of the relationship with J1 Sider. So getting him back to campus was big. There were a few other intriguing visitors on campus today. Ryan Jackson, he's an edge rusher in the 27 class out of Maryland. Really good prospect. He's moved up that edge board for Deion Barnes. He was on campus. A few commits were on campus as well. So wasn't a complete bust on the recruiting front today. There were still some buzz there.
Knew you'd sneak some recruiting in. And, of course, for those who don't know by now, Tyler is our resident recruiting expert at Lions247.com. We'll get him back in pretty soon because we got to break down the huge guest list that is built up for this Oregon game. It's going to be one of the biggest recruiting events ever in Beaver Stadium. And while we're on the subject, great atmosphere today. Wasn't such a great atmosphere last week for a few reasons, but today was a genuine college football spectacle for a 3:30 game against Villanova, which I'll give the community a lot of credit for. More than 109,000 people packed into Beaver Stadium amidst massive renovations. Tailgating scene was awesome. So let's do it again in a couple weeks and bring the whiteout prime time into the mix. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun. We'll see what happens come kickoff if Penn State holds up in its end of the bargain. But a big test awaits. Bye week coming up. We'll come to you with more episodes. We got coverage coming your way from Penn State facilities, more James Franklin's press conferences and all that stuff over at Lions247.com. But go over there now, whether you're listening Saturday night or Sunday. We've got report card. We've got top takeaways. We've got several stories about things that we've discussed here on the podcast in further detail. And we've got our snap count breakdown that I'll put together on Sunday with a bunch of player notes as we start to learn more about personnel situations for Penn State. Good stuff, Tyler Calvaruso. Always a pleasure. We'll get Daniel Gallen back on board for the next post-game podcast and the rest moving forward. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.